Now some 500 reporters have been embedded, as the Pentagon says, with U.S. and allied forces. They will be able to broadcast live from the battlefield.
The embedded press system engineered for the 2003 invasion of Iraq dramatically changed the relationship between home front and battlefield.
Vietnam was the first war Americans watched in their living rooms, but this time they'll be watching war live. What will they make of it?
This was a big change from the Gulf War of 1991. Instead of corralling reporters into press pools and tent cities, the executive sent individual reporters through a kind of boot camp and assigned them units.
I was a little skeptical at first about the whole embedding concept. It really has worked out just as advertised. We're getting to see a lot of stuff, as you saw before.
It's truly history in the making, with the military and media cooperation unprecedented in the history of war on this planet, and we're getting some...
The embedding scheme, of course, prompted new questions.
None of us wants to turn war into entertainment, but in an instantaneous 24-hour media-saturated world, I'm not sure that this is worse than being shut out of the battlefield.
These concerns were not unfounded. As the war progressed, it seemed to take on the look and feel of reality TV. In fact, the embedding idea sprang directly from a 2002 experiment in reality TV called Profiles from the Front Line. Working with the Defense Department and the Pentagon, ABC enlisted the creative talent of two men, the king of action movies, Jerry Bruckheimer, and the father of reality TV, Bertram Van Moonster. Together they produced Profiles. The show, like a cross between Cops and Black Hawk Down, featured cameras that followed soldiers in Afghanistan.
Alpha 1 to space, over. An average day in Afghanistan, somebody will know where some Al-Qaeda are. The helicopter will crash in your compound.
He's going to end up being flown out of here to another location in country. At that location, they have professional interrogation teams.
I'm bringing the dog down here right now.
Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was so enthusiastic about the success of Profiles that he and Vice President Cheney made it the model by which the embedded reporting system was later designed. Profiles aired from February to March of 2003 as the build-up to the invasion of Iraq reached a fever pitch. But by the time Profiles aired, the American public was already well used to the militarization of reality TV. Even before September 11, 2001, in March, the Navy was making deals with MTV for its Real World Road Rules Extreme Challenge, where teams suited up in Navy garb to compete in emergency submarine drills. Later that year, the regular Road Rules show struck a similar deal with the Air Force.
Oh, yeah! It's a B-2 stealth bomber. No civilians ever see this, just Air Force personnel, and nobody gets that close to it.
MTV got a cheap, exciting show, and the Air Force got access to its most valuable demographic.
Air Force Base here in Missouri. We have a message that just came in for the crew of Road Rules.
Also in March 2001, TBS Superstation piloted a competition between teams of real soldiers called War Games. Football star Howie Long did the play-by-play. Ann Powell, daughter of then Secretary of State Colin Powell, provided commentary. On the very same day, Fox kicked off its reality show, Boot Camp.
The premise is simple. For the first 7 weeks, 8 men and 8 women, all called recruits, go through rigorous U.S. Marine boot camp training.
There were 16 contestants that are in boot camp for 2 months. They are put to the test. Grueling challenges, getting up early, being basically in the military, and each episode, one person is voted off. After the person is voted off...
You might notice that boot camp resembles the hit show Survivor. CBS thought so too and sued Fox. Apart from Survivor, though, boot camp seemingly took its cues from the newly launched Army of One recruitment campaign, which also featured a reality TV-style series of webisodes about recruits in basic training. Both essentially had the same plot. Both employed a similar aesthetic, even some of the same graphics. It was difficult to tell the two apart, but perhaps this was the point.
Only at GoArmy.com.
In fact, Boot Camp was a cooperative venture between Fox and the Marine Corps. Captain Sean Haney, director of the Marine Corps Entertainment Liaison Office in Los Angeles, stated, "Right now, reality TV is the big thing. We are the first service to step into the survival reality shows. We looked at it as an opportunity to give the public a glimpse into the Marine Corps." Not to be outdone, the creator of Survivor, Mark Burnett, produced a show for the USA Network called Combat Missions.
And I brought in some of the best feature film people to help me make it look great. I brought in my pyrotechnics people who just came off Pearl Harbor and Windtalker with John Woo. I brought in my military advisors who were also on Pearl Harbor. The guys from Traffic did all my helicopter stunts and aerials. The results are pretty spectacular.
But Combat Missions also contained a grim lesson. Burnett's first pick for a contestant was a former Navy SEAL named Scott Helvenston, who soon became a favorite on the show. Only a year after Combat Missions aired, Helvenston again appeared on television, this time in Iraq. Iraqi resistance ambushed an SUV in Fallujah, killing all 4 people inside, including Helvenston. The insurgents videotaped the event and distributed the footage. Virtually without exception, the news referred to the dead as civilian contractors. In fact, they were mercenary soldiers working for a private company called Blackwater USA, one of many such contractors that the Pentagon now uses in place of government soldiers. Pictures of the crowd dragging the charred bodies through the streets of Fallujah became some of the more defining images of the war. Helvenston's story, while tragic, draws into sharp focus the line between reality and reality TV. The Air Force decided that it wanted a piece of the reality TV pie too. Its entertainment liaison office commandeered the help of an old friend, Tony Scott, who had directed Top Gun, a movie that turned out to be one of the biggest recruiting successes in the history of military Hollywood collaboration. Along with director Ridley Scott, they produced American Fighter Pilot for CBS.
Mavericks airborne.
Breathe in, 110 days, one will be Top Gun.
The show began airing in March of 2002. The producers decided that the powerful imagery of 9/11 and the rhetoric of the War on Terror ought to be woven into the show's teaser.
We're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation.
Other military reality shows aired in the summer of 2002, including VH1's Military Diaries, where armed service personnel kept video journals of their days. Perhaps one of these shows inspired the idea for ABC's Profiles from the Front Line, which began shooting around this time. Recall that Profiles was the prototype for the embedded reporting system. The show began its run in early 2003. As the invasion approached, however, ABC canceled Profiles, presumably to make way for the big reality TV war.
We are seeing this battle unlike any war we've ever been able to witness, almost instantaneous. Some is very dramatic. We've got some footage from the Department of Defense of the U.S. Army Rangers in a battle that raged last night. Let's look and listen.
What characterized embedded reporting first and foremost was its privileging of experience over understanding.
We had very little perspective on what was happening at home and the other pieces of the puzzle. We could follow our unit closely, but we didn't have much connectivity with the outside world.
Just experiencing the sights, sounds, and smells of the scene became the objective.
Give us a feel for the latest, Greg, and also can you give us a feel for, is there a smell in the air? Is there a pace that's quickening? Give us a feel for what it's like to be in the middle of all that.
It's at a personal level.
of what that was like. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you feel?
And we had one incoming a short time ago, and then another one just moments ago that I could feel. You know, earlier we watched bombs fall on southern Iraq and felt the concussion. They were 2,000-pound bombs, JDAMs, and they lit up the sky.
Only the most superficial information seemed to survive in this new environment.
The F-14 that you just saw take off, I'm not going to give you full names at this point. I'm going to stick with call signs. That was Crunchy and Rico taking off in that jet. Prior to that, it was Tonto and Sully.
Go out. They are obviously firing at Iraq into the border region. They're firing 96-pound high-explosive artillery shells.
If Vietnam was the first living room war, Iraq in 2003 was the final collapse of the distinction between home front and battlefield.
They are out of the 3rd Infantry Division. Whoa! I got to tell you, it's a rather surreal experience watching these things go off as close as we are.
The embedding system also featured a compulsion to equate reporters with soldiers. This was done in a number of ways. Many news organizations simply opted to use the word "we" in place of the military.
How would a war with Iraq actually unfold? What targets might we attack first? Which divisions would be the first to fire?
So if we decide to attack Iraq again, what will be different this time around?
Well, that raises a good question. Now that we are trumpeting our location,
absolutely,
and we're announcing where we are, what does that mean? Have we opened ourselves up to any possible...
Instead of a check on power, a fourth estate, the media took their role to be what General Tommy Franks described as the fourth front, an extension of military power. Domestic public opinion thus entered the sphere of battle. If the press was now a useful weapon, objective journalism was the first casualty.
Brian, we're on a security mission of sorts, once again, this time on the lookout for Iraqi tanks and armored vehicles that are still lurking east of Baghdad. We killed 3 tanks yesterday.
Back in the studio, even anchors adopted military language.
Britt Hume live with us in Washington. Britt's going to stand down for a little while, do some reporting of his own, and he'll be back.
By its very structure, the embedding system seemed to prompt a new way of speaking about journalism.
Mike Surrey reporting with the 1st Marines in Iraq. He's been with them from California, traveled overseas with them, and very deeply embedded in a personal way with the Marines that he's traveling with.
But Shepard Smith of Fox News probably put it most succinctly.
We have a number of correspondents in bed with our troops across the region, some in Kuwait, some in...
So long as reporters were now in bed with the military instead of just covering it, they might as well be fitted not only with microphones, but with tanks too.
Why don't you take a walk over and talk to Baghdad Bob and see if he wants to admit that, or bring a tank with you and introduce Baghdad Bob to the great tank guys. Number 3.
There were a few rare moments of self-reflection regarding this new relationship with the military.
CNN's Jason Delaney is embedded with the Marine unit, and he was also involved in the effort, or he was involved in covering the effort. Let's not mistake anybody's roles here. We'll talk to...
But it was the embedded reporter from CBN and Pat Robertson's 700 Club who made no bones about his abandonment of journalistic ethics. Of course, he was in the service of a higher power.
And I got out of the Humvee, and I looked up at the night sky over Baghdad. There was tracer fire everywhere, bombs going off like crazy, and the Lord said, celebrate the victory in the midst of the battle right now. So I began to praise the Lord, and I began to shout out, Jesus is Lord of Iraq. And it's like the Lord just gave me this tremendous peace and joyfulness, and he said, you have done it. The mission is done. Jesus is Lord of Iraq.
Jesus is Lord of Iraq.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, now then, what are the long-range spiritual implications?
It's hard to know whether Jesus would have been as excited as Paul Strand about the falling bombs. What we do know is that had Jesus been embedded in this war, he would have been punished for expressing anything but unquestioning loyalty to the powers that be.
NBC News fired journalist Peter Arnett this morning for participating in an interview on Iraqi state-controlled television.
The embedding system had sold itself on unfettered access to the battlefield. As it turns out, this was another way of saying that the leash had been shortened.
It's really sort of night and day if you compare even what we know now and think about what we still don't know about military actions in Afghanistan with, for instance, what happened in Vietnam. And I'm sure there are lots of folks at CNN who were there friends of yours, Aaron, who will tell you instantly that the degree of access they had, the degree of freedom they had to go where they wanted to go, was infinitely greater than what's playing out here.
The rules had been set. Journalists who refused to play soldier were voted off the island. For the rest of them, the central plot of this reality show was clear. They were in the Army now. Would they cut it?
If it does come down to military action, then this is the one that we've been assigned to ride in. It is number B204. Good news is I'm right up against the engine, a little more protection that way. The bad news, this stuff, this is all the ammunition.
You can see the bullet hole right here where a 9mm slug hit, and here's the bullet itself, which I think Joel's going to hold on to. The problem with these checkpoints is they disappear. They set up a couple of rocks, they have guns, and they will shoot at you. We got through one. I don't know how many more are going to be ahead. There might be a dozen. And is the story worth it? That's my question.
And of course, afterward, there were many stories to tell.
I remember watching on a number of nights when you were experiencing fire. You guys were under fire.
Yeah, and that is frightening.
That's chilling.
Well, we were watching some of the video of you standing with fire going around you, and unlike the troops, you're not armed.
Fox's correspondents Rick Leventhal and Greg Kelly were also in the thick of dangerous fighting. And Kelly, the son of New York Police Chief Ray Kelly, despite being wounded in the face by flying shrapnel, kept on reporting.
For now, Ray Kelly.
Here, the show Inside Edition, which would normally be covering the drama of other reality shows, describes reporters with language normally reserved for soldiers.
Among the standouts embedded with the troops was NBC's David Bloom, the 39-year-old anchor of Weekend Today, who had rolled through the desert in his vehicle's cramped quarters and paid the ultimate price for his hard work. On April 6th, he suddenly collapsed and died of a blood clot.
Who can forget those live reports? They were just classic and beautiful. He's going to be missed.
Reporters paying the ultimate price? And with a blood clot? It's true that Iraq proved to be dangerous for reporters, particularly those unembedded. But what is especially noteworthy here is the focus on the drama of embedding civilians in the military. To see what happens to our favorite characters. To wonder what it must be like to be under such stressful circumstances. To ride along and fantasize about how we might react in their shoes. This is, after all, what good reality TV does. To meet the newfound public demand for the reality TV war, the military went on air with its Pentagon channel in May 2004.
We're going to be covering a lot of different stories today, from the special relationship between NASCAR and the military.
In December, Nightline would do a special called On the Hunt, where reporters tagged along with Task Force Red Dog in Afghanistan.
This is a war story and a love story and a recruiting poster all wrapped into one. This film is a co-production between Nightline and the Discovery Network. On January 10th, Discovery will be launching its new military channel. The Discovery film, Task Force Red Dog, will launch that channel.
As advertised, the military channel launched in January of 2005, streaming the reality TV war 24 hours a day.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter what type of weather, we'll be there.
Starting Sunday, we're showcasing our finest shows.
You name it, we've got it.
Engaging you every night with the best of the best.
That's one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
So, a concern that came up today, which I thought was an interesting one. One of the problems with this is that it becomes almost the ultimate reality TV, and you can forget, I mean, you take the scenes of these vehicles racing across the desert and you add in the fancy graphics and maps and this and that, and you can, if you're not careful, it's true at this end, and I worry it's also true at the other end, you can lose sight of the fact that this is no game and this is no TV show, this is war.